work as a crime scene investigator, and let me tell you, it's not as fun or easy as the media portray. Long hours at random locations, most of which smell horrible. You need to bag everything, hoping you picked up something relevant to the case, and take at least 10,000 photos at different angles, not to mention all the sketches and diagrams you need to make with accurate notes. The DNA you send off to be tested doesn't come back for months, and most of the time doesn't even help with the case you're working on. But it's a job. Most of my career has been documenting drug dens. Drug crimes in my area are way higher than any other kind. That was until one day I was called to a scene of a death caused by unknown circumstances. It was a sight none of us would ever forget. A ghastly scene, and we still haven't been able to unravel the mystery of it. It was a murder. What else could it have been? It wasn't possible that death could happen due to natural circumstances. I found myself standing next to my boss, burdened with all my gear, for once not feeling the weight. I stared, unable to say anything for a few minutes. Out of the hundreds of dead bodies I've seen, this one stopped me in my tracks. I was looking at a young girl stuck inside a tree. Literally stuck inside a tree. Her upper half limply hanging out with both arms and the rest of her body still inside the tree. There was no hole someone cut to shove her inside. She was too fresh to have the tree grow around her. It was like a video game glitch with an NPC being halfway inside a wall. This was reality, and things like this just didn't happen. We did the normal routine of taking photos and documenting the scene. However, everyone was silent. We only spoke when necessary. Something like this was so mind-boggling. I felt as if everyone would want to talk about it to get answers. Instead, we all averted our eyes as much as possible from the dead girl. In the end, a good chunk of the tree was cut out to retrieve the body. To our horror, there wasn't much left. Only an inch of her body was inside the tree. The rest was missing. It took days to finally painstakingly separate the two of them, find out how little we were working with. I had access to the autopsy photos. For a few hours, I looked through them, trying to understand what I was seeing. The parts of her that should be inside the tree were missing. It appeared that the wood had naturally grown around her flesh instead of it being perfectly cut away for her. She was easily identified as a teenager who worked a midnight shift at a gas station. Another confusing fact is that her workplace was located 2 hours away from where she was found dead, and she was on camera leaving the building 1 hour before she was found. There was simply not enough time to transport her, let alone cut her apart and pose the body.
Have you ever seen anything like this before?
My boss asked as I was in the station looking over the photos. I really shouldn't be looking at them as often as I did. There wasn't much else to learn from just staring at the photos. My boss crossed himself when he looked down at the photos. Even though it had been 10 years since he'd been inside a church, I shook my head. On my time off, I'd been looking up strange deaths online to find nothing like this. Nothing real, at least. Just plenty of fake videos that got my hopes up. An even stranger part of this case was how this was the first time someone asked me anything about it. I was the one pressing others to answers and asking for the photos to study. The office felt so silent and somber. Everyone worked away in hushed tones. I understood that such a terrible thing was enough to unnerve all of us, but everyone working on the case acted as if they were ignoring it. Some leads were being followed up, but any time something related to solving what the hell happened to the girl came up, people became pale and quiet. My boss accepted my headshake as an answer, gave the photos one last look, and left me standing in the break room. No one wanted to talk about what happened, and I don't know if that was the reason why the second death occurred. And the second strange death call ended up being for a body inside a building. The deceased was an elementary school teacher. He was loved by everyone, and not a soul had any reason to want him dead. He left behind 2 children and a loving wife. The problem was, he lived in the next state over. His wife refused to believe it was him until she came down to look at the body. One moment, he was asleep next to her, and in the morning, hundreds of miles away, stuck inside a parking garage ceiling with parts of him missing. The station worked double time following up on any lead. Every available man stayed late at the station or on the move, grasping at any kind of straw possible. Finally, the test results came back. When they landed on our boss's desk, none of us believed it. The lab tested parts of the tree to see if there was anything inside the wood, like glue, that may have helped keep the poor girl in place. The results came back as human DNA mixed perfectly with the tree. I noticed the wood looked a bit darker, but how the hell did that DNA get there? Did the blood seep in and stained it somehow? Because of the results, more pieces of the tree were cut out to be tested. They kept finding human DNA mixed into the wood, far too deep for just blood getting slightly absorbed. The traces finally ended, and we added how much of the tree had been contaminated. With some effort and math, the lab determined the DNA mixed with the wood was equal to the same amount that was missing from the girl. They then tested the cement of the car garage, finding the same results. Again, no one could even begin to offer up theories of how this was possible. It was as if somehow those bodies became a part of the material they were found inside. We were just getting over that shock when the worst happened. Another body had been found, all twisted up like a pretzel inside and outside of the front of a car. My boss wasn't on the scene, but I knew he wouldn't be. The victim had been identified by him, after all. It was his car and his niece. I've met Becky a few times. I didn't know if I would be able to document the scene if I knew the victim, but I found it like any other job, simply because my mind refused to believe this was the same bright and lively girl that attended some Christmas parties. She played piano, and my boss always bragged about her. He loved her like a daughter. He and his wife wouldn't have children, but they spoiled Becky as often as they could. And yet, he walked out of his house to get to work and saw her face half-clipped into the front of his car. I don't know how he would ever be able to get over the grief. A neighboring department took over the case due to how many officers simply could not bring themselves to go to the scene. A floor of support came to the family, and still, not a single person spoke about the details. They all just shook their head with haunted looks on their faces, muttering how tragic a young life had been cut short. I felt determined before to solve this case, but now I wanted nothing more but to figure out the reason behind what was happening. I decided to take copies of the reports home. Every waking hour outside my normal duties became dedicated to this case without any progress. On my days off, I found myself at home, staring at the information I already knew, completely forgetting to eat. No matter what angle I looked at it from, nothing made sense. There was no method anyone could use to arrange the bodies in the places they were found in. Even if there was, to do so in such a short amount of time was another thing, making these cases impossible. I wasn't ever going to solve this on my own. I needed more eyes on these cases. No one would believe they were real, though. I was staring up at the ceiling, thinking in circles, when I heard my doorbell. I sat up, looking down the hallway, heart suddenly pounding. No one should be at my door. If I was needed for work, they would just call me. A feeling of dread overtook me when the doorbell rang again. Grabbing my phone in case I needed to call for help, I slowly made my way toward the door. The front door had a frosted window that didn't let me see who was waiting well enough to know if I was in danger or not. I opened the door only a crack to try and see who might be outside. "I'm not buying anything," I said, trying to be stern, but my voice was shaking. Two people stood on my doorstep. One man built like a club bouncer wearing a suit that was far too small for him, most of his face behind a set of sunglasses. Overall, he looked displeased with the world. The second man was tall, but thin. His suit fitted him much better. "We're not selling anything. May we come in and talk?" The smaller man asked as he ducked down and brought his face closer to the opening. The action made me step back a little. He had a calm smile and a soft voice that could put anyone at ease. That worried me. There was something too nice about his manner, as if he tried just a little bit too hard to be pleasant. "No, I don't think you can come inside." I closed the door right away, but he already had slipped in a foot to stop me from shutting it. He then got closer, as if he wanted to tell me a secret. It's really best for you if we came in to speak about these cases of yours, the stranger said in a low voice. Our eyes met and a chill went down my spine. They both had a menacing air about them under all that fake kindness. The fact that they knew about the cases and were wearing suits made me think they were of a higher pay grade than myself, FBI or something like that. I really hoped they were the feds taking over the case and just dropping by to make sure I stay silent. If I was stupid enough to talk to the wrong person about the cases, I could tip off the killer. And they didn't know if I was a talker or not. There's a valid theory about who they were, but it all felt wrong. Official agents would have already introduced themselves and shown me badges. They had done neither. Letting them inside was a very bad idea, but I felt as if I would get some answers from them regardless of the danger. Relaxing my grip, I opened the door, and the first man came inside. The second needed to duck down to fit through the frame. I led them to the living room, and the thinner one flopped down on the couch, placing one leg over his knee. He looked far too relaxed. The bigger one just stood behind the couch staring. I sat down in my comfy chair I recently found on the side of the road. I noticed the thinner one had cream-color hair, the same shade as my couch. I'd never seen that shade on someone before. He seemed like the type of guy that companies sent to put forth a good first impression. Soft brown eyes could charm anyone, but I just didn't trust them. I suppose we should make some introductions, Mr. Garcia. We know your name and occupation, but you don't know ours. I go by Jackalope, and my friend over there goes by Nessie. Unfortunately, we can't tell you who we work for or what we do. He started and gestured a thumb over at the silent man. Jackalope? Is that like a code name or something? I asked, eyebrow raised. Secret agents have code names. Do we look like secret agents to you? Jackalope asked, leaning in conspiratorially. It felt like he was teasing me. What else should I think? I replied, annoyed. He gave his hand a wave and leaned back. At first, I thought he was digging around his pockets for some cigarettes, but he pulled out a large, round sucker. I waited for him to slowly unwrap it. Once it was in his mouth and his hands in his pocket, he carried on. Getting down to the reason why we're here, we work for a company that has an interest in these kinds of cases. We studied them before. They stopped very shortly after we heard about them. So far, we have not been able to gather that much information. He explained, speaking around his candy. This has happened before? When? Where? How did it stop? I asked, my body starting to tremble over the thought of it all. These unnatural deaths happened somewhere else, and they could be stopped. I just needed to know the reason why they started in the first place. I can't outright tell you, but I can give you some hints. We have a working theory of why they stopped. So hint number one, what is the strangest aspect of these cases? He pointed a finger at me while his partner remained silent watching us. It was clear that the strangest aspect was a mixture of the DNA and the body's placement. That didn't explain why they stopped. If someone or something could put them inside solid objects, they would keep going. No. What was even stranger than that was a lack of press on these cases. Not a single newspaper printed the story beyond the fact a body was found. These events should be all over the internet, and yet not even people working on the cases wanted to speak about them. Whenever my coworkers tried, they got a distant look on their faces and tried to avoid the subject. It was a terrible sight, almost beyond human understanding, and no one reported about it anywhere. No one wants to talk about it, I said finally. Bingo. Jackalope waved his finger, looking happy. I arrived at the answer. The more people talked about what was happening, the more it was going to happen. The thought nearly made me sick. I thought of Becky, all twisted inside that car. She was such a kind person and never should have died so soon. If these cases went on, more innocent people would become victims of this strange tragedy. Are you here to warn me to stop talking about all of this? I asked meekly. What? No. We want you to keep talking. Spread this far and wide. Post this online anywhere you like. It doesn't matter if people believe you. As long as they know about these cases, more is going to occur. The man sounded all too happy to explain the reason for his visit. It made rage boil up inside me. I shot to my feet, knees shaking. "Do you want people to keep dying?" I snapped at him. Giving me another kind smile, he waved both his hands to motion me to sit back down. Looking at the bigger, silent partner, I decided that was best. I could toss Jackalope out, but not the other man. He waited until I felt calmer before speaking again. "This is going to happen if you speak about it or not. The problem is, we can't figure out where or when. It happened so randomly. We are lucky to be able to arrive here so soon. We just need to study these events while they are going on to solve them. We want to stop them, but that requires sacrifices." "I'm not going to sacrifice anyone," I replied without thinking. He looked at me as if he was dealing with a troublesome child. Running a hand through his tied back hair, he paused to try and think of the right words to explain what he wanted to say. I understood what he was getting at, but couldn't stand the thought of it. "That is a respectable answer. I know you don't want to be the cause of someone dying, but this could save a lot of people in the future. If we could just study one or two of these events while it was happening, we could put an end to them once and for all. If you can't burden yourself with this task, we can find someone else. Although, it seems as if you are the only one working on this current set of cases willing enough to do it." "Why can't you two say something then? Scared to get fired or something?" There's more venom in my voice than needed. I was confused and angry. Most of my rage sputtered out when I watched both men look at each other. When Jackalope looked back at me, he had an expression I couldn't place. Something forlorn and almost distraught. Taking a hold of the stick in his sucker, he bit down and started to chew the remains of his candy, making me flinch. "Do you know why we're called Nessie and Jackalope? Because those creatures don't exist." I felt a chill go through me as cold brown eyes stared me down. I knew now there was something much more going on than I originally thought. These men may be working for something way bigger than any government, and for a small moment I didn't think either of them was human. When the air between us settled, Jackalope placed both hands on his knees to start to get up from the couch. "Well, it's been nice chatting with you. You have a nice and comfy couch." Standing up, he looked at the other man and gave a silent sign for him to start walking towards the door. "It's just an old ratty couch," I said, feeling as if I should correct him on something. "Sometimes it's a special thing to become old and to be able to own older items," he replied with a smile. It was strange. I was scared of what he represented, but in a way, I didn't dislike him. He did his job very well by winning people over with his nature. I walked him to the door, his partner already outside. "You don't need to do this if you find it too difficult. No one would blame you, so don't worry about it. We'll find the answer at some point," Jackalope said, pausing at the door. He rustled in his suit pocket and took out another sucker, but instead of eating it, he held it out for me to take. He then suddenly leaned in very close, and I was positive he was going to unveil some secret knowledge of the case he didn't want his partner outside overhearing. "Do you know where to buy the cream flavors of this brand of lollipops? I've been looking all over," he asked in a low voice. I brought my hand up to my mouth to turn a small laugh into a cough, hoping he didn't notice. Taking the candy offered, I found this man stupid, but endearing in a strange way. "I've seen them at the dollar store," I told him, and his face lit up. Giving me a small wave, he trotted out the front door, closing it behind him. I was left in the hallway, staring with a sucker in my hand, and a lot to think about. I could be the reason why someone died horribly, and the reason why loved ones would be suffering for the rest of their lives because of the death of another. But if I didn't do this, then it would just keep happening until someone accepted the hard task of spreading information about these deaths. I thought about it for a long time, and what was really best in the long run. There was a chance I post this and nothing happens. No new cases come up, and it just all ends on its own. While out shopping, and still deep in thought, I noticed a small display of the same brand of suckers Jackalope liked. Mixed in with the cream flavors he was after. Buying a few on a whim, I decided then and there I would be the one who said something about these cases. Even if only one more person finds out about them, I felt like I was actually doing something. I'll update again if any new information comes to light because of my actions. A few months ago, I started working on some very strange cases as a CSI. Bodies were being found inside solid objects, inside a tree, inside a building, and inside a car. It simply wasn't possible for them to be in those places in such a short amount of time. The lab results came back suggesting that somehow the bodies became fused into the material they were found inside. The strangest part of the case was people stopped talking about it. No newspaper reported them and no one leaked them online. Then, I was visited by two oddballs looking to be agents of some sort, claiming if I posted about the cases online, more bodies would appear, and they might be able to solve what was happening. In the end, I agreed, and became the next victim. One night I went to bed early for once. When I woke up, I felt an all-encompassing pain, wondering what the hell was happening. I found myself on my back, hard cement under my body. Because of the red-hot pain in my stomach, I didn't even notice where I ended at first. I only saw the stone pillar sticking out through my gut. I stared in disbelief before letting out some hoarse screams. It hurt so much I could barely make any noise. I put my hands against the stone, feeling its coldness. I prayed this wasn't happening, and I just became aware in the middle of a terrible nightmare. This situation was identical to the cases I had been called on. People with objects clipped inside their bodies, for a lack of a better way to describe it. When I agreed to keep the cases going by posting about them online, I never would have thought I would not only be next, but the people we found were still alive when they became fused into something. The horror of that thought came over me. How long did Beck live for, being all twisted up inside that car? By all rights, I should have died right away. The stone pillar took up most of my stomach and important organs would have been damaged or gone. Silently sobbing, I tried to see if there was any way I could remove myself from my position. The pillar stood in a line of others with chains attaching them together. They were made to be a barrier to keep people from going off the park pathway and near the lake just a few feet away. If I pushed myself up, I would get trapped on the chain. I decided I would try and move, hoping that would damage the remaining of my stomach and kill me faster, but my brain hesitated for a few long and painful seconds. I heard a car pull up in the distance, the sound stopping in my attempt to move. I knew I was already dead, but in the back of my mind, I wondered if I got medical attention fast enough, I may live. It was an unreasonable thought. I was missing most of my torso from the pillar. People could live without certain things, but not nearly all of their stomach. There wasn't a doctor in the world that could save me. Still, I moved my head towards the sound of someone walking, trying to fight back pain and panic. I saw their shoes first, clean and shiny professional dress shoes. Not entirely shiny, though. One had a small scuff from where I slammed my door onto it a while ago. Looking up, I saw the surprised face of a man named Jackalope, who wore a suit and gear bundled up on his back.
I wasn't expecting to see you, Mr. Garcia.
He sounded honestly shocked. Without addressing me again or attempting to help in any way, he started to set up high spotlights, placing down a white tarp within a few minutes. My dark corner of the world turned into a blazing white. He also set up a camera on a tripod, but didn't turn it on just yet. The lights looked heavy, although he didn't have any issue setting them up. I whispered from pain, ready to die as he worked away.
I really shouldn't be giving you this so early, but...
Picking a case out from somewhere, he placed it down beside me. Due to how much pain I felt from the pillar, I did not feel the prick of a needle going into my arm. Within a minute, the pain faded. My entire body turned warm and loose. I nearly fell asleep. He gave me another shot that made me keep my eyes open. I still felt drowsy, but thankful for the pause in the pain. My head felt heavy, and I turned it towards him. His cream-colored hair fell out of the ponytail as he worked. After fixing his hair, he sat down a few feet from me, hands on his knees, studying my situation.
Thank you,
I muttered, sounding sleepy.
It's good stuff, not available to the public for pretty good reasons. Anyway, if you're feeling up to it, I need to ask you a few questions. If we can figure out a link between the victims, we may be able to put an end to this whole mess.
He stood up to turn on the camera, but paused when I spoke again.
Am I going to die?
I asked, finding my strength.
Yes.
He replied after a few seconds. It was a miracle I wasn't dead already. Everything about these cases went beyond logic. Nothing natural could explain how this was happening, or how I wasn't already dead. I wondered how often Jackalope came across cases as strange as this. He let me suffer while he worked setting up his gear. He carried on with his strange job with no hesitations. He didn't even look like he cared that I was going to die soon, aside from a slight pause in telling me my fate. This man sounded and acted friendly, but he might be entirely something else under that mask.
Aren't those socks against your company dress code?
I asked finally, with a weak laugh. Peeking out from his suit pants were a pair of neon green socks. He gave me a smile, almost looking relieved I'd forgiven him for how he so coldly acted beforehand. I heard him turn on the camera and watched as he sat back down to get on my level. Taking a clipboard, he put it against his legs to look over the questions on the sheet. I still felt sleepy and ready to pass out. It took a lot of willpower to stay awake. I reached over to touch the cold stone pillar to remind myself of my fate. I wasn't going to just slip off into a nap. Death waited for me.
Now, Mr. Garcia,
you can call me Carlos. I interrupted.
Carlos, then,
he said with a small smile and went back to his clipboard.
It says here your mother passed away. Let's see. What was your relationship with her and how did her death change you?
I might not understand how or why people were being clipped inside things, but what does my mother have to do with any of this? Becky, one of the other victims, still had both of her parents alive when she passed away. Hell, she never lost a single person in her life before. This line of questioning didn't feel relevant.
I loved her and I became motivated to make something of myself after she died. What about your mother? Are you close to her?
I mostly tossed his question back at him to waste his time because I felt like he wanted to waste the limited amount I had left.
I don't have anything like that. Let's see.
He said it in such a matter-of-fact tone it hurt my chest. I long suspected that Jackalope was an agent of some shadow organization. He may have been an orphan raised to do just one job and didn't have any connections in the world. The man's simply a living ghost. Having that theory outright proven in so few words felt unexpected.
I bought you some of those cream suckers you liked. They're at my place. My spare key is hidden under my little happy frog figure on the front lawn, if you want to go and get them after I die.
I commented only because the thought crossed my mind. The comment was a silly thing to bring up. I bought them, and it would be a waste for them to not make it to their intended person. The Jackalope looked a bit surprised again. It appeared as if no one had ever gotten him anything before. Maybe that was the truth. He placed his clipboard beside himself, and then brought his long legs against his chest, his arms wrapped under his deeps as he looked deep in thought.
Do you have any lingering regrets?
He asked me, displaying some somber emotions that didn't suit him at all. What a thing to ask someone while they had a post stuck inside their stomach. Of course I had regrets. I regretted dying to start with. I felt hot tears come to my eyes as my end loomed ever closer. A million thoughts came flooding to my mind because of the question. I felt so scared of death. And strangely, at the same time, I felt guilty about those thoughts.
I didn't want to die so soon, but why is that? I don't have anyone. My father was shot in the line of duty and my mother died of cancer. I've dated on and off, but never found a person who I wanted to spend the rest of my life with. I don't even have a pet, not even a fish. Why should I want to live? I guess I regret that, living a life I didn't think was worth living and yet wanting to keep going. It's not fair, that I wanted to stay alive and I have nothing and no one. Becky still has so many people mourning her. She was going to be something.
I needed to stop speaking to choke down sobs. Jackalope listened patiently and started to pick at a wrapper of one of his suckers. He looked unmoved. The only hint he felt a little upset over my rant was how he just couldn't find the start of the wrapper to open it. The pain in my stomach drew my eyes away from him. Whatever he gave me started to wear off, and I assumed I ran out of time. I wasted my entire life, and yet, at the end of it, wanted it to keep going. Just a bit longer for me to do something, anything to make it all worth it. I'm sorry. I raised a weak arm up to rub my eyes. For what? This is a perfectly reasonable reaction. Jackalope replied, but still hadn't gotten the wrapper started. I've made you cry. Unaware of it himself, tears started in the corner of his eyes, pausing, trying to get his candy free. He raised a hand up to rub one eye and stared puzzled at the wetness on his finger. More tears started to come, and he used the sleeve of his suit to make attempts to dry them. It was a strange sight to see someone crying when they weren't aware of why it happened. That's strange. This shouldn't be possible for me. I knew the thought to be selfish, but I felt glad he was there in the end. I finally did something in my life, even if that small something just left my mark on a stranger who might not even be fully human. Waves of pain started overtaking my thoughts, and I closed my eyes trying to shut it all out. It was becoming nearly impossible to breathe, and my entire body felt like fire. I might only have a few moments left. I could only hope my death led to some answers as to why people died being clipped inside things, and so this wouldn't happen to someone else. I heard Jackalope's frantic voice calling out my name to try and keep me awake. I never expected him to care so much. The pain kept my eyes closed, but I heard him rushing around, running back and forth on the white tarp. Whatever he was doing, I felt like I needed to see it. It felt like hours dragged on, but only minutes passed. Opening my eyes a crack, I saw the man I would like to consider a friend kneeling in front of a small black stone slab. His head bowed and nearly touched the tarp. The black slab only a few inches tall and wide. Still, it gave off such an ominous look sitting on top of the white tarp and inside the bright spotlights. Whatever power the slab held, it scared me more than my quickly approaching death. I opened my mouth to ask Jackalope to stop. The words died inside my throat. Jackalope lifted his head only enough to meet my eyes. I swear he gave me a little wink. Then, a gust of wind slammed into me. I couldn't hear anything through the noise of the tarp flapping around and nearly being blown away. The spotlight slammed to the ground, sparks flying. Darkness overtook my sight. Just before my vision faded, I saw that darkness cover Jackalope on the ground. Dark tendrils twisted around him, taking him into the blackness, and there wasn't a damn thing I could do about it. I woke up, screaming, and tumbled out of my bed. For a long while, I could do nothing but scream and hug my knees against my chest. When the fear finally started to fade, I sat in shock over being alive in my own room. Frantically, I lifted my shirt, seeing a large scar where the pillar had been. A scar I did not have before that night. My legs were unsteady, so I sat on my floor, confused and terrified over what happened that night. If it wasn't for the scar, I would have assumed the entire thing was a nightmare from being stressed from working such odd cases. I should have died that night. Jackalope did something to save me, and I had no way of figuring out his fate. The next few weeks we made no progress on the odd clipping cases. They started to slowly go closer to the cold case pile. In the meantime, I started to do little things in my life so I wouldn't have the same regrets as I did before. First, I donated some blood and then put myself down for an organ donor. If I died the next day, I might be able to save someone. That was a slight improvement over the useless life I'd lived so far. I then adopted a rabbit. I really wasn't home enough for one, but I still got him. The people at the animal shelter worked with me to make sure I had everything set up for him, and even put him on hold until I got everything together. I wasn't even aware the animal shelters kept rabbits. Here I thought they just took in dogs and cats. Soon, I owned a 1-year-old white rabbit named Pesto. After all my minor improvements, I still felt guilty, as if I didn't deserve my second chance. Trying to shake off those thoughts, I went to the pet store to buy more supplies and toys for Pesto. I pulled my car into the driveway, and my heart nearly dropped when I saw someone sitting on my front porch. Gathering my shopping bags, I walked over and stopped just before the stone steps, thinking I might be seeing things. Jackalope sat, wearing a large wool coat, and a small travel bag sat next to him. The left side of his lips was torn and scarred over so badly that his teeth showed through. His left eye was a dull blue, and he wore glasses. More guilt tore through my stomach, but he only gave me a smile. "I got fired," he told me with that warm smile of his still on his face. I got so choked up I couldn't respond. I walked up the few steps to my front door. "Can you take these so I can unlock the door?" I asked him, holding out the shopping bags. He knew where I kept my spare key. I didn't know why he waited outside until I got back. He reached out to take the bags, but something felt off. Focusing on his movements, I nearly dropped my key when I realized what wasn't right. The left coat sleeve flapped around, empty. Not only did he become half blind for my sake, but he also lost an arm. Terrible guilt twisted inside my stomach. No matter how I live my life from now on, I would never be able to repay such a sacrifice. Why would you give up your arm for someone like me? It wasn't worth it. I couldn't meet his eyes as my stomach tightened. "You were kind enough to think about me after we met. It seems like you're still thinking about me," he added with a small laugh and raised up the pet supply bag to prove a point. I could have adopted a cat, but I'd adopted a rabbit because I felt guilty. "That's not enough of a reason to go so far," I argued. "People have lost a lot more for a lot less." Pulling out a sucker from his pocket, he tried and open the wrapper with one hand. I reached out and took it for him to open, only for him to offer it back to me. I couldn't bring myself to refuse the offer. He lived the life of a person who had nothing and no one. Not a soul thought of him after they met. He had one job with an organization I didn't know a thing about, given a name that reflected his non-existence in the world. I had the sudden realization that my life wasn't worthless until that point. If one small gesture like buying candy for a stranger affected another so greatly, I may have done other extraordinary acts without being aware of them. "They kicked me out of the recovery station, and I'm in a bit of a pickle. I didn't want to bother you, but I don't know anyone else. May I crash on your couch for a few days until I can get myself a bit more in order?" He saved my life. I wasn't certain how, but that didn't change how much I owed him. I would have forced him to stay if he didn't ask. Nodding, I finished unlocking the front door so we could go inside. We still haven't solved the cases of the clipped bodies. I didn't ask him questions about his job or what is really going on. Right now, I just wanted Jackalope to get settled. He didn't say so, but he looked tired. I introduced him to Pesto and sat down to type all this out. When I came back to check on him, he'd fallen asleep on the couch with Pesto on his chest. I may not know anything about him, but I trust him. After he recovers, we'll work towards solving the strange body cases without the help of his mystery organization. I tossed him away after he broke whatever rules and saved me. I needed to prove to myself that what he sacrificed was worth it. No matter how much I wanted to interrogate Jackalope about his previous job, I refused to put any kind of pressure on him for the first week he stayed at my place. He needed to get settled in and hadn't fully adjusted to missing an arm. He made attempts to help out around the house, but was pretty slow doing chores. My new roommate quickly got a new job. I told him he should take a break and let himself fully heal, but he refused to not contribute towards the bills. The new job had great benefits. His eyesight was fixed to the point where he just had bad night vision. His left eye was still a dull blue instead of a soft brown, though. I had no idea people who delivered mail got such great medical care. Over breakfast, Jackalope finally decided he wanted to tell me what he was able about the still unsolved clipped cases, and a little bit about his job now. I left the dishes to be washed later and met him in the living room. He honestly got along pretty well with Pesto. He and that rabbit might as well be made for each other. "I guess I need to start by telling you supernatural things are real," Jackalope said as he let Pesto chew on his shirt sleeve for a few seconds. "What does that mean? Like, are vampires real?" I asked, starting to process what he said, and I leaned over to whisper, "Are you a vampire?" Mostly as a joke. Jackalope took my terrible sense of humor well. Pesto decided he didn't, and hopped away to create some sort of mess we needed to clean up later. "I'm something not human. Let's leave it at that for now. And let's just leave it vague on what kind of supernatural things are out there, or else we would be here all day. I don't even know every creature that are real or not." He explained and moved to sit on the couch. I would need to force more information out of him later. For now, I accepted what he was saying. I sat in my chair and kept an eye on our troublesome rabbit. "Those deaths that happened, they weren't natural. How much about them have you not told me?" I pressed, hoping he would drop something that may finally solve these cases. "When I was an agent, I mostly worked on cases relating to cults or gods," he said, as if that statement was normal. "Gods? Like what? The god? Is there more than one?" I pressed. "I cannot confirm or deny the Christian God, or any other kind for that matter. We call creatures with power beyond understanding gods. They can be kind, or not so kind. Most of the time they're just that, beyond any kind of understanding. We suspected the clipping cases were caused by a certain dark god. After I prayed to him and offered anything of mine for your life, we confirmed it was the god behind the deaths," Jackalope said with a strained smile. His missing arm and scarred face were a touchy topic for both of us. I tried not to bring it up at all if I could help it. He didn't dwell on that detail, so I didn't remark on what kind of life debt I owed him. "Does this dark god have a name?" I asked, wondering if this creature was on the same level as Lovecraftian gods. "He decided to go by Dan," Jackalope said with a shrug. It was like time stopped because of how unimpressed I felt. Dan? A dark god beyond human understanding and killed at least 4 people I knew about in a gruesome way, picked the name Dan. Jackalope saw my expression and shook his head. "I told you it wasn't possible to understand them. This god..." "Dan," I cut in. "Dan," Jackalope sighed and went on, "has agreed to stop the clipping cases if someone can guess the reason behind them. He was letting every person take one guess. We were collecting information to see if there had been any similarities or anything we could work with on those cases. No luck so far." Jackalope made a move to cross his arms before he realized he was missing one. He just leaned back on the couch instead. He looked upset over how these murders would keep happening. "Could I take a guess?" I offered. With a nod, he sat up again. "I don't see why not. Even if it's wrong, we could eliminate a possibility." He agreed. At least that was something. A wrong guess still helped. I asked if I needed to get in contact with his old work to do this. He shook his head and got up to head to the spare bedroom I'd let him take over. Jackalope didn't own too many things. I've gone out and bought him some clothing the past week because he only had 3 sets of shirts and pants beside his suits. He came back shortly with an object in his hands that gave me chills. He set it on the coffee table and then wrangled Pesto to put him in the other room. I didn't want our pet rabbit to be near this thing either. I stared at the small black tablet made of some sort of polished stone, the same cursed object that Jackalope prayed to save my life. Had this thing been inside the house the entire time? I didn't like that fact, but I didn't feel the same kind of power coming off the small stone as before. It looked creepy as hell, but it didn't strike dead in my heart. "It's like a phone call. Unless he picks up, the stone is powerless," Jackalope said. I got up to stand next to the small slab, but Jackalope brought it closer to himself. "You don't have to talk to him if you don't want to. He nearly killed you," my friend pointed out. My new scar on my stomach hurt a bit at his words. I haven't forgotten that night. It's a miracle I've been able to get any sleep after that brush with death. But I knew, no matter how much I disliked the idea of getting in contact with the monster that almost killed me, I needed to do so to try and save the others. I gave him a nod, showing I felt ready enough to try out this crazy idea. Jackalope didn't like it, but respected my resolve. I didn't know where to start, that I needed to chant, to bow to the slab, make offerings. Jackalope sat on the floor and gestured for me to sit with him. We both faced the small stone slab and waited. Turns out the dark god was just wanting for someone to try and reach out to him. The room became dark around us. The light faded from the corners first and slowly crept closer. I wanted to move my head to look, but felt far too scared to do so. Something touched my hand and I nearly jumped out of my skin. I risked a glance down and saw Jackalop's hand next to mine. I didn't care what other people might think of the action. I took his hand and held it tight. We were about to talk to a creature powerful enough to kill us without any effort. I needed as much support as I could get. A sudden pressure came to our backs. I knew without looking something was watching us, something huge. All at once I understood how bad of an idea this was. I felt different than what I saw when this thing took Jackalope. The god watching us could take my life on a whim. I knew then that the pillar was the kindest death this monster could think of. The gaze pressed down on us almost to the point the pressure made me move. I didn't hear the words, but saw the question in my head. Why did I kill them in that way? The words inside my head hurt like hell. I almost wasn't able to form any thoughts. It took everything not to buckle under the weight. My heart started to beat so fast it felt as if it may stop. The god at our back pushed down harder. I doubted it really wanted the question answered. My life was at risk. I realized that far too late. If I wavered for a second, that darkness would happily overtake me. A set of invisible hands wrapped around my neck. I choked on air. The fear that overtook my mind made me forget everything else. I was going to die. Simple as that. There wasn't a damn thing that I could do about it. I was facing a god, a powerful one that killed humans in such cruel and twisted ways. Just before I fell into the hands of that monster, a feeling brought me back to my senses. Jackalope squeezed my hand so tightly it hurt. The gesture chased away the hands on my neck. If he faced his god all on his own, then I could as well. I finally found my voice and spoke the answer out loud. Because you could. I barely choked out. The silence that followed nearly killed me. Not a single sound could be heard in the room. Just as I thought I may pass out, a laugh tore the darkness that started to creep ever closer. I finally gulped air, coughing on it. The laughter shook the house and rattled my bones. I curled over and brought a hand to my ear in a poor attempt at blocking out the sound. When it finally stopped, I couldn't stop shaking. It took me a few minutes to recover. I looked up and saw the stone tablet cracked clean in half and Jackalope giving me a bewildered expression. Before I could say anything to him, the phone started to ring. I faintly heard his cell phone ringing as well. I might be one of the last batch of people to have a landline, but no one ever called it. Jackalope got up and hurried over to answer the phone. My legs refused to move. I just sat listening to his responses. Yes. No, not myself. It was him, he said to the person on the other end while nodding. I could see him from where I sat. After a long pause, he nodded again. I'll ask him, he said, and then brought the phone against his chest so the person on the other line wouldn't hear him speak. Do you want a job? My head swam with a million questions. I answered him gracefully. Huh? I don't think anyone could blame me for that response. It took a few hours for me to grasp what was happening and what exactly just got offered to me. The company that fired Jackalope wanted to hire me on for some cases. It seems like I did guess the right reason as to why that terrible monster killed innocent people. That gained me some sort of recognition, but they also noticed my profession. A secret company that dealt with taking care of supernatural creatures needed a CSI for some reason. On principle, I wanted to reject their offer, but I saw the pay increase and debated on it long enough for Jackalope to notice. He still wasn't able to fully tell me what this company was like, but he wanted me to make an informed decision. To be honest, I don't like the idea of you doing this job, but working as a CSI may be the safest position you can work when it comes to the corporation. They pay insanely well, and you can quit at any time. I would say to do the interview and sleep on it. At the very least, I decided to go in for the interview. I might learn some information that Jackalope wasn't able to give. The sudden job offer took my mind off the fact we both faced a god that day. That caught up to me and I found my legs shaking. I needed to sit down. my head swimming for everything that happened in such a short amount of time. Thankfully, my new roommate collected the 2 pieces of the slab and took it outside. We would never have a need for such a cursed object. I think he threw it over the fence into the neighbor's yard, but I wasn't certain. He soon came back in the living room to collapse on the couch next to me. "I could have died," I said out loud, the shock wearing off. "If I knew that was a possibility, I never would have let you place that call. I may have drawn that God's attention onto you because I asked for your life, but we now don't need to ever deal with him again." I chewed on my lip, thinking of the most important question, unsure if I wanted the answer. After finally knowing why those people died, I didn't feel any sense of closure. What happens to the cases? Are they going to be unsolved forever? Is that God going to be punished for what he did? I asked, mostly to myself. Jackalope thought about his answers. He knew anything he said would be unfair. It was hard for him to admit what he was about to say. "The corporation may stage some sort of end for those cases in order for the families to fully bury their loved ones. For cases like this that have a supernatural cause, they always do a cover-up. And no, I don't think the killer is going to be punished in any way. He's too powerful for almost all of the agents currently working. The few that can do something about what he's done are far too valuable to risk avenging a few human deaths." I didn't have a high opinion of his old job before. Now I really disliked it. He noticed my expression and finally smiled. After getting scared to death, the expression was a welcome one. "The corporation makes hard decisions, but its main goal is to protect humans from the supernatural. I know it's hard hearing they would let a god go free for killing humans, but they're doing so agents can live and keep saving as many people as possible. The corporation has done a great deal I don't agree with, but I understand it." I nodded, knowing what he was getting at. I was on the fence if I wanted to work for a company that operated like that. I wanted to help save lives as much as I was able, but could I stomach the cost? "Speaking of disagreeing with hard calls, if you do accept the job, I would prefer it if you did not work in the department Lupa oversees," Jackalope said, interrupting my thoughts. "Lupa?" I asked, trying to think if I recognized the word from somewhere. "He's one of the office supervisors. They decided what agents go to what cases. He's good at his job, but we just don't get along. Working for anyone else would be better for you." I wanted to press him on what he meant, but could tell he wasn't going to say anything more. Jackalope only held back information for my benefit. If I knew what really went bump in the night, I might not be able to sleep again. And if he'd talk more about his previous boss, I wouldn't be able to objectively consider taking the job. "I'll keep it in mind. Did they say when the interview is?" I asked, wondering what exactly was said over the phone. He shook his head and told me a text would be sent within the next few hours with more details. I accepted that answer and decided I needed to get some rest. My stomach refused to stop hurting from stress after our encounter. Jackalope also looked exhausted. It didn't bother him with any more questions for the rest of the day, and just let him play with Pesto and take naps. I think he needed an easy day. Because Lupa was a very busy man, our interview was arranged very late. He requested I meet him at 10 p.m. A worker from the corporation knocked on my door to collect me for the meeting. I opened my front door and was taken aback after seeing the inside of an office building that should not be on the other side. "We can connect 2 doorways together. I'll show you the way to Lupa's office," the agent told me in a forced cheerful tone. He wore a suit and nailed the government agent look. I carefully stepped inside the office and didn't want to close the door behind me. The agent then reached out and shut the door. I found myself trapped and unable to look back out of this meeting. He guided us through the office space and down a few hallways until we reached a large door at the end. Large potted plants sat on each side of the door. Lupa, written in golden letters, made it clear who this office belonged to. "Good luck," the agent said and quickly left for some other job task. I wasn't sure if I should go in or knock. I knocked first. When I heard no answer, I stepped inside. A wave of hot and humid air hit my face right away. It was hard to know just how large the office space was. Each inch of it had been covered by plants. Some almost appeared alien, and others were just simple flowers. I made my way along the path and found a set of couches in the middle of the forest. Lupa sat with some reports in his hands waiting for my arrival. The only other information Jackalope gave me about this man did not at all help me prepare to see his appearance. My friend said that despite Lupa's height, he could be fairly menacing. I wondered if he had been joking, and why Jackalope couldn't get along with his boss. After all, he did love rabbits. He should enjoy being around the man I stared at. Lupa looked young, maybe mid-20s. He wore sharp dress pants and a vest combo, the vest brown with gold accents. His hair was short and a soft brown in a style a bit too fluffy to take seriously. If he stood up, he may only come up to my waist. His pants stopped at his knees, and a pair of animal legs crossed over each other. If I didn't see his ears, I still would have known right away what kind of animal those legs belonged to. His ears stood tall on his head, so tall it added half a foot to his height. I desperately wanted to touch his rabbit ears. He might look harmless, but I bet Lupa could break my face with a flick of a finger. He brought his golden eyes up to meet mine, and I quickly sat down on the couch across from him. Gods, secret agents, and rabbit people. My life had gotten strange. Should I have brought a resume along? I asked as Lupa set down the papers in his hand.
We already know of your work experience. This meeting is mostly to answer any pressing questions you may have. I assume there are a few.
He answered in a voice that sounded far too adult for his small body. I have enough questions to fill a book. I started with the simple ones. Why ask me to work here? Don't you have a ton of other people who can do my job? Like, I bet most with any career related to law enforcement must know about monsters already and could be a better choice. I said, doubting they only offered the job because I answered the question correctly. Lupa shook his head, being very patient.
We are very careful to ensure humans are not aware that creatures of the night are real. Since law enforcement is more likely to encounter them, we focus our efforts on taking over such cases, or averting their attention when needed. But on occasion, some cases are difficult to appear natural.
He explained. There wasn't much they could do to make those cases normal. Even a cover-up might make the entire situation more suspicious. Was it possible for this company to erase memories? Just how much power did they hold? So, you want to hire me because I found out about the supernatural? But why would your company even need a CSI? Like, how would that even work? Do you arrest monsters? I pressed. Lupa paused, trying to get his thoughts in order. There was a lot to tell me in not that much time.
At certain times, we are not certain if the culprit is human or a supernatural case. Sometimes bodies are found and the police assume an animal did the damage. In reality, it was a creature hunting in the wrong area. Your job is to cover those scenes in the same way you would for a natural case. If it turns out to be a creature behind the crimes, we catch and kill them. If it is a human, we send off the collected evidence to the police to close the case.
Lupa explained in an even tone. His calm voice sent a chill down my spine. I wasn't fully aware of what kind of creatures were out there, but weren't some like Jackalope? I couldn't help but think that maybe some kind of creature killed a human in self-defense. If that happened, would they be put to death for the crime? And if that kind of situation didn't happen, then were there just monsters out there hunting us without anyone knowing?
There isn't a prison or anything like that?
I slowly asked.
There are places to hold creatures who are waiting to be put down, or the ones we aren't entirely certain of their crimes. On rare occasions, we offer the creature a job hunting down the ones who share the same crime. We lack resources. They're going to die either way. Might as well be useful.
Another chill went through my body. Lupa smiled, but on him, it looked more like a grimace. I now knew why Jackalope didn't get along with him. This man was the type to only care about the bigger picture. He tossed my friend aside because he lacked power. No, I bet he got angry Jackalope sacrificed his ability to work for a single human. His future of saving others was cut short in exchange for my life. Lupa was good at his job. His main goal is to protect humans from supernatural threats, and he didn't care about how many agents needed to be used up to do so. As much as I hated the idea of what this man stood for, I still wanted the job. If I worked for them, then maybe I could help save others. I bet they had agents doing the crime scene documentation right now. If I freed up just one of them, they could go and save others I couldn't.
I can take the job, but would it be possible to work in a different department other than yours?
I asked and braced for the reply. Another forced smile came to Lupa's face. Instead of small teeth, he showed off sharp fangs for half a second.
I see Jackalope spoke about me,
he said in a slightly darker tone than before.
He was fair. I realized we might not get along after speaking with you.
The air grew tense in my words. Sweat started on the back of my neck, and it wasn't due to the humidity in the room. Finally, Lupa relaxed with a shrug.
You'll be offered cases as they come up. I'll be the one overseeing the first few because I'm the one who offered to hire you. After a report or two on your progress, you'll be free to bounce around whatever department you wish. There's no lack of cases needing to be covered.
Dealing with him was almost as bad as dealing with a dark god. With that settled, I wanted to get the hell out of this room. A phone rang from somewhere inside the office, giving me a reason to leave. I stood up and brushed against a large leaf of a plant I didn't know.
Be careful on the way out. Most of these plants are poisonous.
Lupa said, and dismissed himself to disappear into the greenery. He might have been joking, but I didn't take any chances. The same agent that guided me along took me back to a door that led home. The idea of them being able to open a door that led to the inside of my home really wasn't appealing. Peace of mind was worth more than convenience. The first thing I did was head to the bathroom to wash my arm where the leaf touched. My skin red, but that may be from the scrubbing. Jackalope was already in bed by the time I got home. His new job wore him out. He often took naps while hanging out with Pesto or just trying to do chores. I kept the bathroom light on as I walked into the hallway looking for a towel. I'd washed most of them and never put them back in the bathroom. A small closet should have a cloth or something. When I opened it, I found it empty of all the extra sheets and blankets. I found that strange. The cloth was on the floor by Jackalope's bedroom. He left his door open a crack while he slept. I bent down to pick up the cloth and peeked inside his room. With the light from the bathroom, I saw a mountain of blankets on his bed explaining where they went. He must be dying under all of those. I made a mental note to tell him in the morning he could turn up the heat if he got cold at night, but it wasn't chilly at all, which I found strange. I reached out to turn off the bathroom light, and my hand froze. The idea of being in the dark scared me down to my very core. The feeling of what it was like facing that god came back. It took all my willpower to push those feelings back and not run around the house turning on all the lights. A small moment explained why my new roommate took all the blankets he was able. He'd gone into the darkness alone and lost pieces of himself. The cold blackness would always follow him. He wasn't able to keep the lights on at night without me asking questions, so he kept the coldness away. He also refused to ever speak about this. I knew he didn't want me to regret the fact he saved my life. I didn't know how to approach the topic, but I couldn't let him suffer at night like this. The next day I worked a regular job. It felt odd, seeing a hoarder's death as just a normal day after everything I'd seen. I went shopping on the way home. I caught Jackalope before he went to bed. I showed him the 2 items I picked up that day. A heated blanket and a block of glass with a rabbit on the inside. If you put the glass over a small light base, it makes the image appear 3D. He understood why I gave him these random gifts, but neither of us spoke about it. He just thanked me and went to sleep, this time with a light inside his room and warm, without feeling weight pressing down on him. I knew if I accepted the job at the corporation, I would be exposed to more dangerous and terrifying things. Jackalope said it was a pretty safe job, and yet my life would be in danger depending on the cases. Still, I wanted to do my best to put an end to any case even remotely similar to the clipped body deaths. I said I wanted to make a difference in my life, and this was one way on how to do it. In a very short amount of time, I found out that not only were supernatural creatures real, but they also needed a CSI. I debated whether I wanted to accept their job offer. The extra income was the main factor that swayed my choice. A handful of cases were sent to my email along with the amount each job paid. I gained a bonus if I trained a few agents while working on the job. As there were so many cases to cover, I doubted that having more people trained in my skills would ever dip into my income. When I asked about this job, I had been told that I would be working on scenes that could have been done by a human or a creature. However, the first deaths I documented could only be committed by a monster. After all, I'd been requested to look over the deaths of torn-apart creatures. A human could not do such damage to these bodies. I'd worked with a few agents and taught them as well as I could. Each of the ones I met went by a different number instead of a name, and they all looked very similar. At least they were good listeners. They've gotten a lot of recent cases of monsters killed with organs removed, with their bodies with other pieces missing. The agents I worked with told me that the body parts of monsters hold power. An organ could be turned into a weapon or a medicine. Sometimes creatures just eat the part of the body to gain a boost, but body parts are more effective after they're processed. I taught these agents a trick of putting vapor rub under your nose to help with the smell of decay while working. In exchange for that tip, they told me a little bit about how their world worked. I was stepping into this entire thing blind. I wouldn't understand much for a very long time.
The world is mostly based on favors. Killing a creature and taking parts of them is very disrespectful if it was done by another creature.
An agent told me as he kneeled by a mangled corpse. The monster of the day looked to be a mixture of a bird and a fox. The body is as big as a car with most of the insides torn out. He was taking photos and trying his best to get as much coverage as possible. He went by a pretty big number of 10,006. I just called him 6 to save time. I also asked him if he really had over 10,000 brothers. He confirmed it, but he wasn't aware of how many were still alive. That number could be in the low hundreds.
Don't you creatures kill and eat humans all the time?
I asked and directed him to some places of interest to document. He looked human. Jackalope did as well. A lot of these monsters held a human appearance, but others looked too terrifying to remain sane after encountering them.
That's different. Most of the ones who kill and eat humans know you don't follow the same cultures as us. Only the jerks would try and make you uphold favors and deals if you didn't understand it beforehand. It can get pretty complicated to understand if you're not living in this world. A creature may feel it fair to kill another if that one sets foot on its territory. They see it as another creature who breathed their air and lived because of it, and that means that they could take their life. Some monsters send twist words around to get their way.
6 explained the best he was able. I tried to wrap my head around it. If I came across a very bad monster, just looking or speaking to it may trap me in an unexpected deal. Or if I came across a creature that only saw me as a meal instead of an equal to take something from, I would get eaten.
So, monsters just eat humans instead of being complicated about it?
I slowly asked.
Some, yeah.
6 agreed and went back to taking photos. I suddenly worried about what kind of job I took and the kind of world I stumbled into. The agent didn't appear to notice my distress, and we worked together to finish the scene. His theory was a hunter or a poacher attacked the creature we documented. I needed to have 6 explain the difference.
There is another company made up of only humans that track down creatures to kill them. They use magic, so it would make sense why they took organs from this creature. Most likely they wanted to create a weapon to hunt down more of the supernatural. Hunters kill anything not natural out of hatred. Poachers do so for money. They'll only kill if it's profitable.
6 explained, not sounding too bothered by the fact some humans hunted his kind.
Doesn't the corporation do something about the hunters?
I asked. A noise drew my attention to the woods. A set of deep yellow eyes stared back at us through the trees, making me jump. It was clear some sort of monster was watching us. I raised my camera as a poor defense in case the thing rushed over to attack us. A snout very similar to the dead creature we were investigating came out. After a few sniffs, the thing retreated into the woods. I breathed a little easier, but wasn't able to fully relax.
Don't worry, those creatures won't attack you while you're with us. And no, the corporation doesn't stop the hunters most of the time. To be honest, it's all above my pay grade. They work together when needed and both know of each other's movements. I know that the hunters have killed agents or tried to ruin the corporation, but there was never proof, or they claimed a rogue hunter was the cause.
6 said and knew we were almost finished with the scene. I wished I had a larger crew to work on scenes like this. The numbered agents worked hard, even if they didn't fully know the job yet. Each of them learned quickly. 6 seemed to pick up what to do the fastest and spoke the most. He acted very friendly and didn't wear the sunglasses all of his brothers did. His eyes are blue, but not so dull. They look like they should belong to a dead man. Even with unnerving eyes, I like talking to him. Are you all right with that? I mean, you don't sound angry that they've killed your coworkers and maybe some of your brothers. Wouldn't you be kind of upset a little about the fact that they hunt you down even though you're working to save humans from creatures? I said and helped him start to pack up our gear. He thought about the question for a few moments. He shook his head, his soft expression never fading. Six wasn't as stern as his brothers. I wondered why that was, but didn't ask. No, I get it. The hunters form because they hate creatures. Some creatures hunt for food, others for fun, and others because they can. It's impossible for humans to only kill the ones who hunt for food, and it's impossible for creatures to only eat bad humans. Even bad humans have people who care about them. The hunters decided to try and kill all of the supernatural creatures because they don't see any of us as equal. I don't agree with that outlook, but I understand it. Six said, and he never lost his kind tone. I've tried to think about all of that since I found out about the whole monsters eating humans thing. It really seemed like there was no fully moral option for both sides. Monsters needed to eat, but there weren't enough murderers and other violent criminals to support their populations, and I know the legal system didn't get it right all the time. Supernatural creatures might eat someone innocent locked away for a murder they didn't commit. I bet that no matter how hard they tried, the hunters would never be able to kill a dark god, like the one who caused the clipped body cases. I was lost in thought when Six spoke up. You're living with Jackalope, right? He said out of the blue. I knew Jackalope had been an agent, but didn't know who he worked with in the past. I nodded and Six went on. We've done a few jobs. He always treated me nicely. How's he been doing? Is he smiling a lot? The agent asked, and I felt a small pain of guilt in my chest. Jackalope hadn't been smiling that much lately. He forced one on his face when he saw I was looking in his direction. I was the cause of that. The trauma of what that god did to him had yet to fade. I doubted he would ever fully heal. I wanted to lie to Six, but figured it was best to admit how my friend was doing. No, not as often, I admitted. For some reason, Six smiled at that answer. I think that's all right. Jackalope did a lot for work as smiling was a tool. I'd hoped that he would feel comfortable enough to show some different expressions someday. I never considered that. Jackalope was a bit of a different person when we met. He acted more subdued after he moved in, and I just assumed that was because of what happened. It was possible he no longer felt pressure to keep a certain act up. I considered talking to him about this, but much later after he got more settled in. Just as we finished cleaning up, Six got a call asking for him to go on a job. I was free to go for the day. He thanked me for the help, and I thanked him for what information he gave me that day. Most of the time, the emails for the jobs listed what agent I may be working with. I decided I wanted to work with Six more, even if that meant accepting lower-paid jobs. I could always take the bigger paydays after I talked with him a bit more. I told him to be careful on his next job, which caused Six to give me an odd look. I wondered if that had been the first time someone ever said those words to him. I really needed to start treating these agents nicer. Their lives seemed pretty terrible from what I'd seen so far. When I got home, I got changed right away and went into the shower. The smell of all those dead creatures stuck to my clothing. Since I started working in the field, I bought cheaper clothing that could be thrown out if the smells couldn't be washed out. The outfit for today had a few more jobs in them. While I was in the shower, Jackalope came home. He normally checked up on Pesto and then got started making dinner when he finished work. To be honest, I tended to order food out rather than cook, or I just skipped meals depending on how bad the scene smelled that day. I already gained a little bit of weight since Jackalope moved in. I never noticed how thin I'd been until I started to look healthier in the mirror. I stood in the doorway, watching him work away. I've offered to help, but he refused, saying he liked cooking, and I usually messed up dinner so badly it's a miracle I hadn't burned down the house yet. I worked with Six today. He asked about you. I told him, forgetting that I'd been the one to give the agent a nickname. Jackalope paused to look over his shoulder, trying to place who I'd been talking about. He knew Six was a numbered agent, but wasn't certain which one. 10,006. I corrected myself, his expression cleared with a smile. A small grin was not the same kind of emotion I'd seen from him when he first sat on my couch. He no longer acted like an agent, but sometimes I still saw traces of the person he'd been forced to be.
He's one of the youngest numbered agents. We only worked together a handful of times. I'm surprised he remembered me. What did he want to know?
Jackalope asked and turned back to making dinner. He found the knife sharpener buried under the kitchenware I neglected to organize after my mother passed away. With a sharp blade, he didn't need to hold on to the vegetables to be able to cut them, but he tended to dice food slowly and unevenly, which was to be expected. He wanted to know if you're still smiling, I said, deciding not to lie to him.
And what did you say?
He asked back, not pausing in his work. I told him the truth. You are, but not as often. He liked that. My new roommate stopped cutting the vegetables for a few seconds. He turned the words around in his head. When he started back up dicing, I could tell he liked the answer. He'd been worried about how other agents thought of him after he got fired. They might not all be friends, but on jobs they needed to rely on each other. All of them wanted respect from their coworkers. I never thought about how much the idea of the other agents not respecting Jackalope could upset him. He did his best to hide his worries and wasn't the kind of person to ever talk about what ate away at him. He protected a human and paid a heavy price because of it. If anyone thought less of him for his actions, then he didn't need to care about anything that kind of person might have to say. I didn't feel very hungry that night because of what I needed to deal with during the day. Somehow Jackalope tricked me into eating something before going to bed. I packed up the leftovers for lunch the next day. If I did a tamer scene, I would be able to take a break and eat. If it was a bad scene, then I would give my lunch to the agent I worked with that day. I quickly found out all of them liked free food, but loved Jackalope's cooking more. A few of them may get jealous over the fact I wanted to work with Six more often now. The next day I got an email near noon asking to cover a scene at a campground. I saw Six's number and accepted. I found myself in the middle of the woods with the agent within the hour. The job description was fairly vague about the details. Six helped unload the gear but wasn't going to help document the scene that day. Instead, he stood watch, his dull eyes trained on the woods and a hand on a small dagger at his waist. The air tense between us. I still risked speaking as I got started working, careful not to disturb the trash around the small campsite we arrived at. What's up with this job? I don't know much about it, I said while taking note of the smaller details so as not to miss anything. The fire pit was still fresh, maybe only a few hours old. I bet if I dug around, some embers still remained. The tent had been torn apart with some blood staining the edges. The camper's items were scattered everywhere. Most of it was damaged. If I didn't know better, I would say this was some sort of animal attack. The torn tent looked to be ruined by claws. For some reason, bits of trash littered around the scene. I didn't know the debris had been here when they set up camp, or they were just very messy. Some campers heard a scream in the middle of the night. They were half asleep and only remembered it in the morning. They came by this camp and saw all of this. They called the rangers, who called the police. Six explained, sounding oddly serious compared to yesterday. I'll need to record what shoes everyone who came by this scene was wearing and where they stepped. I told him, wondering what kind of mess we walked into. Already requested. We have some detectives working for us on cases like these. They can help gather evidence and do interviews with suspects. That answer brought up more questions. It felt like nowadays I was just always asking for more information. I really lacked enough knowledge of the supernatural world and how the corporation functioned. Did the police call you guys to take over once they knew this wasn't a natural case? I pressed. A wind blew, causing a scrap of tarp caught in a nearby tree to wave. The sound made me jump. I thought it was something watching us. Documenting all this trash was going to be annoying, but necessary. You never knew what may be important to a case and need to record everything. No, they're mad we took it over and kicked them out of the woods. There was another set of campers that disappeared 2 weeks ago. No bodies were ever found. The corporation keeps an eye on all recorded cases and will only send out agents if there is a high chance of something supernatural being the culprit. There are far too many cases for the current amount of agents to deal with, Six admitted. He kept looking around in the trees as if expecting something to jump out. His grip was so tight on his weapon, his knuckles turned white. Aside from those small signs, he didn't show how stressed he felt. I wondered what about this case made them certain some sort of creature had been behind it to act so quickly. I didn't know how long the police started to investigate the woods before they were removed. As far as I could tell, this didn't stand out as too odd of a death. I then didn't like the idea of seeing two people disappearing in the middle of the night, assumed dead as a minor case. These were people, and I started to act as if it wasn't too big of a deal. I've been working a bit too much lately.
What about this stands out? I'll need to know what kind of supernatural things to look for in future cases,
I said to the tense agent.
There is a mixture of a lot of things. No bodies normally mean they were eaten. Forests tend to be a hunting ground for a lot of different creatures,
he replied. He started walking a little to try to ease some stress. Six moved very carefully not to disturb the scene in areas I hadn't fully recorded yet. If a candy wrapper blew in front of his path, he very carefully stepped over it. I really wanted a crew for this. More people could cover the area faster, and I risked missing something. Plus, I couldn't control the wind or other elements that may disturb evidence before I got to it.
Do creatures hunt in the woods because it's easier to hide from humans?
I asked, still working away. Six nodded without stopping his pacing, fearing he may step on some evidence. The wind started to pick up, kicking around leaves and other items. At least the campsite was relatively enclosed, so the litter couldn't get very far.
That and a few other reasons. They're attracted to the magic that leaks from living creatures. The forest has plants, animals, and insects, so more magic than a city. But some creatures are attracted to cities and hunt regardless of if it's riskier or not.
Magic? I paused working to turn that word over in my head, and of course there was magic. How else did that god stick people into objects? For some reason I never really thought about it until that point. Somehow I saw a short man with rabbit features as something natural. Magic explained everything odd I'd come across, and yet my brain didn't want to believe it was real. That was another topic I needed to ask about.
Living creatures have magic? Even natural ones?
I pestered. It was hard getting all of this straight into my head as well as documenting the scene. If this turned out to be a supernatural creature, then I needed to know as much as possible. Knowledge normally leads to more evidence getting discovered while in the field.
Yes, but it's a very small amount. Most say humans don't have any internal magic because you can't use the power most of the time. And in such a small amount it barely counts.
Dick started to explain.
How small are we talking about?
He stopped walking to gather his thoughts. He crossed his arms for a few seconds to figure out an example that may work.
Let's use stars in the sky. A human may have 1 star, 5 or 10 at the most. I'm a fairly weak creature, but I still would have at least 5,000 stars worth of magic.
He explained. I considered the difference in power level between us. I wasn't really aware of what magic could do, but it was clear that the more of it was better. There was such a vast difference between us, even though Six admitted to being weak. If a tree had the same amount of magic as a human, I understood why creatures would be drawn to the woods. Hell, even if every insect had half the amount of magic that humans possessed, then it still added up to a massive amount inside any forest.
What about Lupa? How much does he have? And what's the strongest creature out there? I assume gods should be loaded.
As nervous as he felt about us being in the woods with the possibility of some sort of monster lurking around, he was glad for the conversation as a distraction.
Lupa is pretty strong. All the office directors are. He may be somewhere between 500,000 stars and near to 1 million. The difference between his strength and my own is massive. Gods are nearly impossible to fully understand their powers to gauge it. And for the strongest creature, that would be the Silver King. His strength would be equal to every star in the sky that has ever existed and shall ever come into existence. That magic is endless and we all owe our lives to him. Since you're human, you'll never truly understand how much creatures of the night love and fear him.
He said. His tone was very hard to read. The expression on the agent's face froze the blood in my veins. Out there somewhere was a monster that went beyond the dark god that took a part of Jackalope. What I experienced trying to answer a simple question was nothing compared to what ruled over the entire supernatural world. I prayed I was too far beneath the king's notice for us to ever come into contact. The sound of the tar blowing against a tree drew my attention over to it. Dick tensed again. His hand was already drawn to his weapon. I wished I had a gun or something to protect myself. When I started working, I was given a windbreaker with some forms to sign. It had a simple CSI on the back and nothing else. I was told that the jacket held some protective power, but not much. Since I would be working with agents, the corporation didn't want to waste resources on a more powerful jacket when I sort of have bodyguards. I trusted Six to do his best if something came out of the woods, but I found myself worrying about him. He did appear to be an adult, but the longer I looked at him, the younger he looked. Six, how old are you? I wasn't sure why I asked such a question. He was confused over the inquiry. At first, I thought I asked something too personal. I soon became clear he was just thinking hard about the answer as if he really didn't know. I think this is going to be my third summer. The numbered agents are born as something not human. Were placed inside a deceased human body and fused together with it. I've gained some memories of the one I took over, but only general things. I don't know whose body this was, and I haven't experienced most of what I know. I stared over at him, shocked he was only 3 years old. It didn't feel real. I understood what he was saying, but didn't want to accept it. Six was too damn young to be out here fighting monsters and trying to act like an adult. I dreaded the idea that he had been working as an agent for all 3 of those years. Seriously, what was up with their world? Did he not have a childhood at all? I stopped working long enough for him to notice. I forced myself to go back to documenting and bagging items, but my thoughts tore into my heart. Did Jackalope go through the same thing? He wasn't a numbered agent, so not a part of their family, but I guess his life was the same as theirs. He may have just started working the moment he was able. A sound much like a twig snapping came from the woods. I shot up to look around as Six pulled a dagger from his belt. I watched in shock as he flipped the dagger in his hand and the blade shifted into a revolver in the middle of the swift movement. I was still new to seeing magic in motion. Even something as small as a weapon changing was a bit amazing to me. He held the gun up, ready to fire. When he didn't see or hear anything, he let his hand drop to his side and took his finger off the trigger. Neat magic dagger, I commented after my heart slowed down a little. The bullets are weaker than the magic that gets torn into the target if you stab it, but it's useful to both have a long-range and short-range weapon. Six admitted with a nervous smile. I half listened to what he was saying. Something in the trees caught my attention, and I focused on it. The human brain has a trait for seeing faces or objects in random patterns, like seeing a cloud as some sort of animal, or the face of Jesus on burnt toast. I've heard the theory it's helped our ancestors by assuming every tree branch in the grass is a snake because sometimes it is a snake that could kill them. When I arrived at the campsite, I thought I saw the tarp as something it was not, a body of some sort of animal hiding behind the trees. As I looked up at the leaves, an odd image caught my eye. First, I thought the bark of the tree looked like half a face staring down at us, because I stared at it for so long trying to convince my brain it was nothing. I saw the creature before Six. He looked in the same direction, but didn't notice the same thing I had. The monster realized I was staring right at it. The half-face in the trees moved, and I shouted at Six that something was coming our way. He flew into action, no longer caring about stepping over the crime scene. Our lives were more important than evidence. He raised his gun, but wasn't able to get a clear line of sight until it was too late. The thing came from the trees, body making so many sounds as it came down on us. The same sounds we've been hearing since we got here. I was pushed out of the way at the last second as the monster wrapped a massive body around my agent friend before he got a shot off, his gun getting tossed from his hand as he was slammed against a tree so hard I heard bones snapping. I shouted out his name, and that got the creature's attention. The gruesome face turned in my direction, causing me to stop breathing from fear. Six. The monster's head was made up of 4 parts of human faces stretched and melded together. The open mouths made up the eyes, and the mouth was just an open hinge. The teeth made up of broken glass, bones, and twigs. The blue tarp made up most of the long body. The thing was very much like a centipede made up of a mixture of trash and plant matter of the rest of the human victims it claimed. 4 human rib cages hung from the tarp, some with still fresh blood clinging to its bones. The smell of rot became overpowering when the direction of the wind changed. I became so frozen in fear I couldn't move. The monster came down, but I got saved yet again by Six, who shoulder-checked the creature out of the way. It let out an ungodly screech as it rolled along the ground. The body picked up the pieces of trash as it rolled. Any damage Six could do would be recovered by the amount of garbage around us. I looked for his weapon. I spotted it far too late. Arms took hold of the agent. Each arm is either from the humans it killed or made of pieces of solid trash. He forced down a cry of pain, refusing to let me hear how much trouble he was in. "Carlos, run!" Six shouted, his voice cracking. I froze yet again, unsure of what to do. I couldn't do anything to help, and yet I refused to let another person get hurt to save my life. Six struggled the best he could. His face started to change into something inhuman. The skin on his hands burst to show a white set of claws underneath. With strength I didn't think he had, he tore through the hands, keeping him captive. The trash monster screamed in 4 voices at once. A set of large claws broke through Six's shoes. His legs now looked much like a set that should belong to an insect. His mouth went from ear to ear, and his eyes were now large and dark. I dove for his gun, feeling the cold metal in my hand. I should have made a run for it, but I wasn't thinking properly at that moment. At first, it seemed like Six gained the upper hand with his new transformation. He jumped and caught the creature along the side. The claws tore through, spilling out litter from the body. He landed on his feet, ready for another attack. I shouted out a warning. At the same time, another set of powerful hands grabbed at him. They tore through his chest, and I helplessly watched. I raised the gun and fired. It caught the creature in the face, but didn't do that much damage. The recoil of the gun hurt my hands like hell. For a small weapon, it should not have hurt that much. I refused to drop it. The monster tossed Six aside and came down on me. The thing caught my leg, lifting my body to slam my back against a tree, stunning me for a few seconds. My eyes flooded with tears from the pain. The jacket protected my ribs from being broken, but I felt a snap coming from my ankle. When I opened my eyes again, I was face to face with countless lines of teeth. All of them were ready to come down on my head. I searched through my mind, trying to think of what to do. The gun would not do enough damage to kill this monster, and I didn't know how to switch it back to the dagger. Instinct guided my hand, along with something else. I wasn't aware of it, but the forest wanted this creature dead. It was ready to offer up power to do so, but couldn't act on its own. If my will faltered even in the slightest, that power would have been blown back into the face, killing me regardless of if this creature ate me or not. A force surged at my back, a warm, encouraging feeling joined with my single purpose. I did want to live, but I wanted to protect Six even more. Without thinking, I shoved my arm into the monster's mouth. The teeth cut my bare hand holding the gun. I took a breath and fired the gun once. A burst of power that was not my own came from the weapon, tearing through the body from the inside. A pale green light exploded outwards, destroying most of the creature's body besides some parts of the humans it took. I collapsed, my hand bleeding like crazy and shaking. Waves of pain came from my ankle, but I ignored the feeling to stand up. I stumbled over to Six and got beside him. Blood poured from his chest, and his breathing was raspy, almost broken down. It was hard to fight through all the emotions, to dig through his suit pockets to find his phone to call for help. I don't know how long we stayed there for. It may have only been a few minutes. I took a hold of his hand, refusing to leave him. "Hey, kiddo, you'll be all right. Help is on the way. You'll be fine," I said, my voice barely a whisper. I don't know if he could hear my words. The blood stained his pale face and white shirt. Finally, others showed up to collect us. It took a lot for them to separate us. In a blur of motion, I found us inside a hospital, and they needed to pry my hand from his to take me into a different room to be treated. My injuries were mild. Since I now worked for a supernatural company, they had ways of healing wounds faster than normal. My hand and ankle were wrapped in some bandages I was told to leave on for 3 days. I also was ordered to stay off my foot, which I immediately refused to do so. I paced outside my room, demanding to know how Six was doing. I wanted to be right with him the moment he woke up. I wasn't even aware of how I looked. My front was covered in both of our blood, and my clothing covered in dirt from the fight. Because I refused to listen to anyone, they brought in the big guns to get me to go home. A short man came down the hallway, his soft paws silently walking across the floor. He stopped in front of me, but I still refused to stop moving. It felt like if I stood still, Six would die. "The agent is alive. He'll recover, but we are unsure of his future with the corporation." Lupa spoke in an even tone. Rage flared through my body. I stormed over to him and took his collar in my hand. I knew he was far more powerful than myself, and yet I didn't care. "Why was it just us out there? Six could have died. You should have had another agent just in case."
"We do not have enough agents for just-in-case situations."
Lupa cut into my rant before I got too far. That simple fact deflated my anger. I suddenly felt drained and needed to sit down. I slowly sank to my knees, feeling dizzy and sick. To his credit, Lupa didn't comment on my weakness.
Take some time off to recover, and to decide if this job is suited for you.
The man said sternly. He turned on his heels and left me alone in the hallway, debating all my choices so far. Some kind of staff members took me home. I was in such a state of shock I didn't know what to do the moment I walked through the front door. My eyes fell to the shoe rack because a certain color caught my eye. Jackalop's work shoes sat on top of a plastic bag covered in blood. Panic arose through me and I charged into the living room to find him sitting on the floor watching Pesto hop about. The bottom of his pant leg stained with blood, but he was uninjured. His face flew into the same panic as I felt when he saw my clothing covered in a deep red. "It's not mine," I croaked out, trying to calm him down. That relaxed him enough to pause getting up from the floor. I sat next to him, still too much in shock to do anything else. Jackalope was an agent. He knew days like this happened. "Your shoes," I started, unsure of how to ask what happened to him that day. "Delivering mail to monsters gets messy some days. It's fine," he said, but sounded exhausted. I did a double take over what he said, which made me give him a strange look. "Monsters?" I asked slowly. I knew he got a job delivering mail, but didn't know he dealt with monsters. The more I thought about it, the more sense it made. "I told you they fixed my eyesight. Didn't you think that was done through regular means with no recovery time?" He answered in a light voice. "Well, UPS or FedEx is a big company. I thought maybe." I started trying to defend myself. "Carlos," Jackalope said gently. I found myself blushing from embarrassment. This entire time I assumed he worked with humans. At least he was kind enough not to laugh over my mistake. "We'll buy you new shoes tomorrow. Is there anything else you need?" I said quickly, trying to change the topic. He knew not to ask me about my day. I would tell him when I felt ready, and he would do the same. He thought for a while and finally looked over, sounding like a child asking for an expensive Christmas gift. "Can we get a friend for Pesto? I know it's a lot to ask for another animal, but I feel bad he's alone all day while we're at work." I don't know what kind of horrors he saw that day, and yet he was worried about a rabbit. I smiled, which I didn't think I had the expression in me that day. "We'll look into it. I want to make sure we know how to introduce a new rabbit and if Pesto wants a friend," I told him. When I was a child, we had a few cats. I knew that some animals you couldn't just toss together and expect everything to be fine. I didn't want to put Pesto into a stressful situation when we just wanted to do what was best for him. His smile was something I was glad to see after the day I went through. We sat for a long time, trying to process what happened. It wasn't just our jobs, but everything we'd been through in such a short amount of time. He shifted, trying to get comfortable, and his hand brushed against mine. On reflex, I took it. "We're still here," I told him, unaware of why I felt the need to say it. He nodded, needing to hear those words. After everything, we were still here, and that's all that mattered at the end of days like this. He didn't force me to eat something that night. I showered and tossed my clothing out. He did the same after me, and we both went to bed early, unsure if we could even sleep that night. I hated being in the dark after encountering that god, but I felt that if I slept with a light on, that would be letting him win. I tossed in bed, feeling far too cold under my blankets. I refused to open my eyes and look out into my dark bedroom, fearing I may see something staring back at me. I think I slept for a few hours. The exhaustion finally caught up to me when I woke up. I felt even more tired than when I drifted off to sleep. A soft sound of footsteps came from the hallway, making me sit up in bed. I thought I had closed my door, and yet I saw a figure walking down the hallway to stop just before my door. I wasn't scared because I recognized the silhouette. "Jackalope, what's wrong? Having trouble sleeping?" I asked in a tired voice. His form appeared black from the small amount of light coming from his open door. Since he moved in, he hadn't once gotten out of bed after dark. Seeing him at my door was strange. "Can I sleep with you?" The voice came from the figure. It sounded like Jackalope, but fear tore through my body. This wasn't him. I was either having a nightmare or something else got into my house. The shape noticed I knew something wasn't right. 2 blue flames appeared as eyes in the dark. The figure started to make a run towards my bed, the footsteps heavy with laughter that mixed in. I launched myself towards my bedside table and flicked on my lamp. The light covered the room, and the moment it turned on, the figure disappeared as if it was never there. Breathing heavily, I scanned the room. I then flew out of bed to turn on every light in the house. Jackalope somehow slept through the entire event. There wasn't any way I could go back to bed after what I saw. My theory was that that dark god wasn't done with us yet. I could have rented a room somewhere for us, but I assumed a god could follow us anywhere. Until I could get a hold of someone in the corporation to help, I decided there was no harm in keeping the lights on at night.